land of the free, the home of the brave. Is that what you see around you? Brave people making stuff, doing things, selling it to their customers, an economy growing vigorously, creating jobs every day. We haven't seen that in a very, very long time. The land of the free, the home of the brave sounds like a distant pipe dream. And it is. And if you want to know why, what are the causes? Is it Bernie Sanders tells us it's bankers, Wall Street. Just so you know, without going into the details of it, because the complexity is mind-numbing, that business, all different aspects of what used to be called the banking and financing business, which included commercial banks, investment banks, all different types of banks, all those banks have been forced to consolidate because that's the only way they can deal with the real menace that they face every day, which is they are completely under the thumb of multiple federal regulatory agencies. That's what the reality of that business is. And the banking business, whether you like it or not, is what creates money. It's what finances businesses. And as you know, if you've ever been short of money, you know money is the lifeblood of your life. And that's even more true for businesses. When they don't have money to finance what they're doing, they're toast. And that's what the banking business is all really about. It finances activities by real-life Americans. And that business has been completely under the thumb of multiple federal regulatory agencies since 1913. That's just an example of one business. And by the way, when we use the term regulatory agency, what are we talking about? We're talking about a bunch of federal bureaucrats who have life and death power over not only the business that they're regulating, but all their customers. And the customers don't even see it. What they do is they're able to tell the business that they're regulating what to do, which limits the opportunities available to their customers. Ever wonder why drug prices are so high? Well, the FDA was formed in 1906, and it has total control. I'm talking absolute total control over every aspect of drugs, food, you name it. And yet, isn't it amazing how people still die? As if putting the federal government in charge can stop that. And in fact, and there's hundreds of these agencies, and that's exactly what the real problem in this country is. All those federal regulatory agencies, every one of which, except the IRS, by the way, is completely unconstitutional. What they do is they police businesses, and they police the citizens who buy and sell in those businesses, and they police their customers. It's literally a police state. And to give you some idea of the multiple constitutional infringements that are involved in every one of these agencies, consider, you know that we have three branches of government: judicial, legislative, and executive. And the founders did that precisely to divide power in the government. And it's forbidden that there ever be one person or one agency, one body that has all three powers. Except Congress has been passing these laws creating these agencies, every one of which exercises all three powers. Consider when Congress, and by the way, there's nothing in the Constitution that permits Congress to do this. Congress has simply appropriated the power. The president signs the bills. Usually Congress does it because the president demands it, sometimes because people in the press demand it also. They find some scandal and say, oh, we got to form an agency. The president then signs it, and the courts rubber stamp it. They totally disregard multiple provisions of the Constitution. Each one of these agencies, the first thing they do is they write their own laws. Even though Article 1 of the Constitution, the very beginning of the Constitution, says all legislative powers shall reside in the Congress. Congress is the only one that's allowed to write laws. And the way they rationalize what these agencies are doing when they write laws is they call it regulations. Well, let me tell you, when you're fined under a regulation, you've been hurt by a law, even though it was not passed by Congress. And Congress does this to hide what they're doing. And it's all happens in the dead of night by nameless, faceless bureaucrats. They have procedures that Congress has enacted it's called the Administrative Procedure Act that says how they have to do this. And it's a fig leaf pretending that, oh, well, this makes it legitimate under the Constitution. That's a load of crap. None of it's constitutional. And to give you some idea, these things are passing all kinds of laws, every one of which is enforceable by criminal sanctions, jail time, fines. The federal government was never supposed to be policing us at all. And this is one of the great frauds that is used to perpetrate this police state. That's what it is. It is a police state that the federal government has imposed on us that has a vice grip on every business in this country coming from multiple angles, and that affects us. Consider, if you're a business and you want the business to grow. Well, how is it going to grow if you've got to go suck up to some 2 or 3 or multiple federal agencies whenever you want to do anything? And they even in advance, when they write these laws, they say, you can't do this, you can't do that, even if your customers want it. Because why would you do it if your customers didn't want it? What good is it going to do for you to do something terrible to your customers? Are they going to pay you for that? And that's the discipline of a real market economy. The market economy disciplines the people that are in it, because if a business wants to do something, and it doesn't, and the customers don't want it, they're not going to pay for it. And if nobody pays for anything the business is doing, they go out of business. That's the discipline of the marketplace. Now, the other big fraud that's used to permit all this is the notion that, well, if we don't have all these regulatory agencies, it'll just be the Wild West and there won't be any law. There is no law except for the agencies to govern these businesses who simply want to rape their customers and destroy the lives of their employees. Well, that's a load of crap. Also, at the time the Constitution was enacted, every state in the country, and they still have this, had their own laws to police the citizens. It's called the law of torts and the criminal law of each state. And there's a huge difference between the way those laws operate and the way these federal agencies do. And it has to do with when the law applies. Under the real criminal law that was permissible, which was purely to be administered by the states. And by the way, we know that that's the case because in the Constitution, it spells out the only criminal laws that Congress was allowed to even get involved in. The federal government was not allowed to police the citizens. We fought a revolution against the British to establish this country, to stop them from torturing us with it was actually illegal activity under British law. And the reason it was illegal, and if you read the Declaration of Independence, you'll see how they spell this out, that they were being treated like second-class citizens in the British Empire. Because the British people, free men in the British Empire, had rights. And those rights had been won in a series of revolutions, one of which was in the century before our revolution. It took 20 years between 1640 and 1660. And in that revolution, the people who were effectively our forefathers, the English of that period, fought against the king, and the purpose of it was to stop the king from imposing centralized authority over the whole nation. That was the most important thing. There were aspects of it. There were courts called the Courts of Star Chamber that the king used to exercise power over his subjects. It was totally tyrannical, just like these agencies. And they fought a revolution to prevent that. And boy, was it bloody. The king got his head chopped off, and his son was only allowed to assume the throne when he promised to obey all this stuff. Well, when in America, we were entitled to the privileges of being British subjects. And that was a major reason why we fought the revolution. Another reason was we wanted to establish a republic where where individual liberty was going to be respected, and the federal government was simply not going to be allowed to police the citizens except for very specific crimes. And they are spelled out in the Constitution, and the reason they're spelled out is because those are the only ones the federal government is even allowed to be involved in. All other criminal administration is supposed to be done by the states, things like murder, theft, fraud. That's not, the federal government isn't supposed to be involved in that at all. And by the way, there was no Justice Department until 1870 for precisely that reason. Anyway, the few crimes that are actually permitted for the federal government to administer are treason, currency violations, things, counterfeiting, piracy. That's it. Oh, and administering what is now Washington, D.C. That's it. They weren't allowed to police the rest of us at all. And I was telling you about the difference between the federal policing laws and the way the state policing laws work. And that's the difference between tyrannical laws, which are what have been throughout continental Europe. It was imposed by vicious tyrants on the people of France, Belgium, Germany, all that stuff. The difference between those kind of laws and the criminal laws that were allowed to be imposed on us has to do with who the laws apply against and when. And under those tyrannical laws, which is how these agencies operate, the laws apply in advance. You have to seek permission from the bureaucrats if you want to do something. So the law applies in advance. It's a prior restraint on the freedom of the citizenry, both in terms of what businesses and customers can do, and even when they're allowed to do it, what they can buy. Have you noticed that every car in the country, they all look the same? It doesn't matter what the price is. And by the way, the price of cars today is literally 20 times what it was not that long ago. And in the good old days, they all look different. You go back to the 1960s. In those days, the most expensive American car was, guess how much? Less than you could buy a Yugo Ford today. And the reason for that is that business, like the banking business, the drug business, is completely under the thumb of the federal government, totally illegally. They're told what to do, even all the little minor details of how a car has to be built. And they don't improve safety. They don't improve anything. All they do is they give politicians power over that business. And when politicians have power over a business, that business is corrupt. So if you think it's a rigged game, you're damn right. It is a rigged game. And the only one with the power to do that is the federal government. Because when the government takes over a business, it's what they do in communist countries. The only difference between what we've got here and real communist countries is nominal ownership of the company is still left in the hands of its owners, but they've got to answer to federal bureaucrats. And the federal bureaucrats, by the way, just like Castro, don't pay a dime for stealing the business.